It took me 12 nights to figure out what the littlest werewolf wanted from me. I'd stand in the sheep pasture at twilight and glare at her as she crouched in the sagebrush, her unblinking golden eyes tracking my every step. My old sheepdog Zeus would bark and claw in the red dust, agitated and protective, yet too lazy to make the chase. But the wolf never tried to steal a sheep. She never moved at all. At least, not unless I broke her gaze, and looked away for a moment. Then I'd glance back, and she'd be gone, in an instant disappearing into the pinyon and juniper trees of the Hummingbird Hills, that sunless thicket where the less benevolent of the gods were rumored to lurk. I'd stand quietly and listen to her mournful howl bring down the moon, a bewailing that echoed through the canyons and vibrated the dry grass beneath my feet. Kill the white man, seemed to be her lament, carried on the cool night winds. Kill him. Her words confounded me. There were certainly no white men around here. Living in a remote pueblo in the desert canyon lands of northern Arizona, the only white men I ever encountered were the occasional sheriff's deputy or government agent, well-intentioned Mormon missionaries promising a marvelous afterlife, or anthropologists fascinated by our complex pantheon. All of these visitors were politely escorted away. Even still, the presence of the little wolf bedeviled me, for I quickly understood that I was the only one who had yet seen or heard her. A real wolf, Papa? My youngest daughter Ariadne asked me one morning, as I told her and her sisters the story over breakfast. Or a creature quite like it, I said, finishing my cereal with one hand, stirring sugar into my coffee with the other. I reckon there's a breath of something primate and conscious in there. What makes you think she's not all wolf? My middle daughter Antiope asked. She crouches in the same place every day and never looks at the sheep. She watches me alone, with the saddest of eyes. Her ears flick at the sound of my voice, and her own howl is unusually expressive and forlorn. But a human can't howl. My oldest daughter Arachne declared. Maybe she's a god in disguise, I said, winking at her. Or their half-human child. The daughter of a wolf god, born to a human mother who feared it so much she abandoned it in the desert to die. My wife Leah suddenly dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, and I turned in surprise. I hadn't noticed her there, standing at the stove, listening to the conversation. What do you think it is, Mama? Antiope asked her, unconcerned. Leah shrugged and took a sip of her coffee from the mug in her hands. I looked but saw no broken mug. I blinked, figuring I'd only imagined the loud smash and the fragmented splinters of earthenware. Isn't the Fish and Wildlife Service reintroducing grey wolves around here? She said. They're trying to clear the overpopulation of deer at the Grand Canyon. Maybe one of those wolves wandered across. Maybe, I agreed. But this one speaks to me, I think. Just like Auntie Cassandra, Ariadne said. She hears the wind speak to her in human words. It makes her twitch and falls down asleep, and behind her eyes, she sees the faces of the gods who make the wind. Cassandra's mind is very ill, Leah said. Leave her alone, and leave the wolf alone. If it is a god, it's best not to meddle in whatever task it must complete. Would anyone like some coffee? The brewer steamed and hissed. The radio buzzed and hummed the morning news and the weather reports. I had to admit, I couldn't dispute my wife's assertion. But I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't get the narrative out of my head, of the little cub with a mortal mother and a divine father, a child with an uncanny inclination towards turning canine when the moon rose in the sky. It brought a little spark of a thrill to the slow turn of life. The life of society's outliers, out among the barren rust-colored desert. Letting my imagination run wild, I thought of my son, somewhere far from home, being cared for by the spider god who called him her beloved. I gazed at my daughters, young and vulnerable, yet so untamed and wild. I thought of the human mother who might, at this moment, be wondering where her little half-divine wolf cub was huddling, imagining her child lost among the old trees and the voices of the night. Was she scared? Was she hungry? Was she shivering with cold in these crisp autumn evenings after the sun went down, yearning for the familiar warmth of home? I loved my own children more than anything. I understood that primal, animalistic urge to protect one's defenseless offspring. My heart softened towards the staring and unmoving cub. Her origins were an enigma to me, but, were she my own daughter, I'd certainly hope another parent would be there to keep a vigilant eye on her and listen to her unspoken desires. The next evening, I began to bring small scraps of mutton and elk jerky to the wolf girl. She'd cower if I walked too close, pulling back her lips to show me her gleaming white fangs. "Kill the white man," she rasped, in a voice like radio static. "First you must eat," I whispered affectionately. "Then you may kill whatever ghosts you happen to find." I was often close enough to smell her, only briefly. She carried the sweet scent of burning sagebrush and tobacco in her fur. Once, I thought I saw a single tiny, glistening tear emerge from her sunken eye and roll down her snout. "Kill him," she howled from afar. "Kill what man?" I asked. "There is no white man here. Only me, and I'm the only one who knows you're here. Why won't you let me help you?" She stared, silent as ever. But she did not run from me that evening. Encouraged by her sprouting interest in being nurtured, I turned up a few old baby blankets. Within their folds, I tucked bits of fragrant lavender and soothing catnip. I left them under a pinyon tree near the border to the dense forest of the Hummingbird Hills. I'd taken care of her hunger and her shivering. All I could do now was try to heal her loneliness, to take her somewhere warm and inviting, and reunite her with the family from whom she surely must have been forced to depart. But that was not to be. On the 12th day, I was paid a visit by a deputy of the county sheriff. I was spending a lazy autumn day in the kitchen garden, checking the tall stalks of blue corn for ripeness, pulling back the husks to get a swift glimpse of their deep indigo kernels, their rare beauty as hidden and lustrous as a dragon's cache of jewels. For a moment I imagined myself the hero of that story, slaying the dragon and stealing its bounty. He didn't see me watching him as he drove up the winding road that spiraled around the mesa on which our pueblo was perched. His clunky white pickup truck rumbled and roared across the ancient bridge of bones that connected Mercury Mesa to Jupiter Mesa, and followed the dusty red road to where I stood, a fat husk gripped too tightly in my hands. Deputy Babbitt got out of the truck and faced me, covering the gun on his hip, watching my hands, avoiding my eyes. Babbitt didn't much care for people like me. We didn't much care for deputies. "Sir," he nodded, trying to look casual in a place so backward and foreign to a white man. He swept off his sun-bleached cowboy hat and leaned against the hood of the truck, stubbing out his cigarette with his pale leather boot. "How's everything going around the farm? How's your wife and that beehive of daughters?" I looked over my shoulder to make sure my family was safe inside the house. I remembered then that Leah had taken the children along to see the traveling carnival in Kanab. Zeus was probably asleep in the sheep pasture. "Mr. Beartooth," Babbitt said when I didn't answer, "I've heard a rumor that you've spotted a wolf nearby, one that's stalking your sheep and eating your food." Rumor? I said. Gossip, certainly. There haven't been wolves around here for 50 years. You ought to know that. Who told you I'd seen a wolf? Cassandra Maldonado. She won't speak to me, but I heard her young daughter's gone missing, and I believe the girl may have been dragged away by the wolf your kids are telling everyone about. Poor Cassandra. Her daughter was all she'd had. But if there was anyone who craved utter solitude, it was Cassandra. She lived a hermetical life on the dusty outskirts of the Pueblo, with only her cows for company, and we all assumed that's the way she wanted it. I myself had always been uneasy around her, never sure what to say or where to look when I'd bring her gifts of surplus peaches, and she'd begin to yelp and swear and convulse. But we all avoided her, back then. We told ourselves it was what she needed. I was vaguely sorry to hear her child was missing. I'd forgotten she had a child. I turned my back on the sheriff's deputy, and back to my corn. I've told you all I know, I said to him, my fingers idly digging at the brittle husks, not knowing even what they were doing. I hoped he wouldn't see my hands shaking. I think it's time for you to leave, Deputy. Babbitt was quiet for a long moment. Well, I have the feeling there's something else you're not telling me, he said, his voice as low and discordant as a rattlesnake's tail. I clenched my jaw. I waited. I opened and closed a corn husk, again and again, entwining my fingers in the gossamer green tassel, feeling the taut bulge of milk beneath the swollen kernels. I glanced at the garden shears on the opposite side of the garden, imagining the crunch they'd make as they sheared off the man's nicotine-stained fingers. There was a sound of a door opening and closing. I turned around again. Deputy Babbitt was dragging a brownish-grey bundle from the bed of his truck. His hands and his white jacket were stained with its blood. I knew right away what I was seeing. Its fur was matted and dirt-clogged. Its caved inside was stained with a rust-colored smudge. Its tongue hung out of a mangled snout, and its amber eyes stared straight ahead, into my own eyes, as they always had, never breaking that line of sight. Babbitt dropped it heavily on the ground and finally stared at me forthright. "Don't you ever lie to me like that again," he hissed into my face. "I've just done you a favor by shooting this dangerous animal, and now I expect to be thanked, not deceived. I put my life in danger for your flock, for your wife, for your children. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. That's all I ask. There are worse predators out there than this one, and you have no idea what I've done for you, to let you people quarantine yourselves up here without interference. My family has lived in Arizona for a century, civilizing this barren dust bowl, trying to guide your people into the modern world, and all we get back from you is suspicion and scruple. Now, don't you dare take my protection for granted, and ruin it for the ones that want progress and improvement. Don't you dare violate that tenuous trust I've been generous enough to give, even as I overlook your flaws. Don't you dare." I glared, straight ahead, our faces so close I could smell the remains of his cigarette in his white mustache. I did not sever my gaze with his. I thought of the littlest werewolf, speaking through the silence, pleading with her eyes. He couldn't hold for long. He kicked the wolf's body with his white boot. "So that's all you've got?" he growled. "No thanks. No gratitude? Does this dead menace mean nothing to you?" "You are nothing to me," I said. "One day you, too, will lie in the sand, but you won't get a burial nearly as grand as hers. Your mouth will fill with dust and cornmeal. Your tongue will be replaced by a scorpion's tail. Your eye sockets will be the nursery for a rattlesnake's eggs. Your ribs will be made hollow by the sun, and will whine in the wind like a bone flute. Is that a threat, he said, backing away, or a curse? Neither, I said. It's an expectation. An aspiration. An invocation. He gritted his teeth. Then he turned, smashed his hat back onto his head, and got into his truck. I waited for him to cross the bone bridge before I turned and crouched at the side of the little wolf girl, another father's daughter, my pollen-covered fingers stroking her ears, still soft, still listening to words carried on a wind that blew from another world, the land of the dead. I lay there until the sunset. Then I carried her down the mesa and buried her at the edge of the sheep pasture, the place where I'd first seen her, waiting, quietly begging me to listen to her wolf words. I smudged her nose and forehead with all the corn pollen remaining on my hands, as one does to both the newly dead and the newly born, as I had done to all my children, and later to my father. Zeus watched for a while, sitting on his haunches, before he finally let out a low, ululating howl that echoed off the hills and resonated through the canyons and reverberated in the craters of the luminous silver moon. He led me back home, where Leah and the children had already gone to bed. In the night, I woke, feeling as if I'd heard my name whispered in a dream. I rolled over to watch the moon out the window, but the clouds had gathered, covering it in a pearlescent shroud. Hephaestus, a voice called to me into the stillness and the holy dark, a voice that sounded like Cassandra's. Hephaestus. She was pregnant. Too young to be, I said, and could not contain my tears. She was only 13. Too young, I said again. Too gentle to endure. I sat straight up. Was she born human? Not a wolf? Fully human, Cassandra whispered. Deeply loved. Who transformed her? The voice was silent. I looked down at Leah, asleep next to me, untroubled by the whispers. I wondered if I had only dreamt the conversation. For immediately it was lost in the haze of linear time, just like the coffee mug that had never shattered. Soon I too slept again, a restless doze that allowed my mind to walk barefoot across the desert sands, leaving no footprints, wandering under a swiftly spinning sky whose stars had no names. The following morning, I found the body of Deputy Babbitt at the far end of the sheep pasture. He had been scalped, flayed, and disemboweled, his entrails making spirals and curlicues in the dust. His throat had been torn out, left in bloody tatters of oozing, putrefying shreds of flesh. His genitals had been torn almost completely from his body, left dangling and mangled. His toenails and fingernails had been yanked out of their bleeding cuticles. His mouth, open in an eternal scream of agony, was stuffed with dried sagebrush and cactus thorns. His ribcage, splayed open to reveal a half-eaten heart and lungs, made a wailing, keening noise that swelled and receded with the icy wind. I looked at my fingertips, again dusted with corn pollen. Then I wiped my hands on my jeans and did not touch the dead man's forehead. From afar, I felt myself being watched. I turned. Watching me from the other side of the fence was an enormous wolf with green eyes that wept human tears. Its fur was black all over, like a person in mourning. It gazed at me not with fear or caution, as the young one had, but with attentive rage. "Who are you?" I asked, holding its gaze, my hand on the hunting knife at my hip. "It ought to be your wife lying there in the dirt, rotting alongside the man," said the black wolf, in a voice like the whispers I had heard in the clouded night. "Your dispute is not with Leah," I said. "She's done nothing wrong." "Leah never asked my permission to transform my daughter," said the black wolf. She acted hastily, and by the time I found out what happened, she could not undo what she had done. My Ida didn't have to die. She didn't have to suffer in the cold night, alone and starving, wondering why this perversion had been put upon her. I don't understand, I said. I loved my daughter. I loved her. She was all I had. I would have loved her baby, in a way that nobody in this desert ever loved me. You've all rejected and abandoned me, forced me to live far away from everyone. You hated Ida for her slow mind and slow speech. You hated me for the way I twitched and fainted. Yet still, I had no desire to be a wolf. Magic in the hands of one with an unsound mind is perilous. But when the deputy came around, talking rumors about my Ida, I transformed myself anyway, to be close to my little one forever. And now it's too late. You've all killed her. The black wolf stepped closer to me. Leah stole something from me, in more ways than one. She stole it to carry out her private vengeance on the white man. But my own vengeance is not complete. Warn your wife that when I see her again, I will tear her apart, piece by piece. I will prolong her suffering for years, as I replace her human body with this wolf's body. I refuse to become human again until I've been satisfied. Then she stood on her hind legs, becoming as tall and straight-backed as the tallest human. She bolted into the overgrown woods of the Hummingbird Hills, to where the sun refused to shine. I confronted Leah that night by the fireplace. "Don't keep secrets from me like that," I said, softly, restraining my impatience, my indignation. "I had every right," she said. "It's not the first, and won't be the last." "Why, Leah? Why did you turn Ida into a wolf? You're not a shaman or a witch. You have no right to be using magic against a child. Why would you do something so contemptible?" Leah was listening to a record of Bach violin sonatas while she drank watermelon wine straight from the bottle. Its sweet smell could not overtake the steely scent of blood that saturated the room. She set it down, hard, on the wooden floor and looked me straight in the eye. I was protecting Ida when Cassandra showed me the black moth encased in amber, a gift she'd claimed to have been given by the wolf god White Paws. She swore it would turn me into a wolf. I could finally kill Babbitt with no consequences, as I had wanted to do for so long. But I found that I couldn't. I had too much to lose. I have a home, and children, and a job. Instead, when I saw Ida was pregnant, I gave the piece of amber to her and changed her into a wolf. I forbade her from telling her mother, and I sent her out into the desert to hunt that lowlife scum. Protecting her? From what? You seemed to have tied a knot even you cannot untangle. I told you. Ida was pregnant. Who do you think was the father of her child? And who do you think is Ida's father, too? The deputy, I said, suddenly feeling small and simple for not making the connection until now. Ida had always been more light-skinned than the rest of us, and we had mistrusted her because of it. What an abomination, for a man to beget a child one his own daughter. I gave Ida a gift. Leah continued. The gift of carrying out vengeance. The only gift I could give that would match the generosity of a wolf god. I would have wanted that privilege for myself, years ago. I was younger than she when Babbitt raped me, and my rage had a knife's edge. I raged because I was powerless. And his power is so unbounded, that he killed Ida anyway, not to protect himself from the accusation, but because he could. Eventually he would have found some other girl to victimize, and then what would we do? Turn all our girls into a colony of bats? Would you want to see your own daughters hanging upside down in a cave all day, unable to live a beautiful life in the sunshine? I admit I used magic that did not belong to me, and which I had no right to try to control. But you need to understand that I only intended to protect the girl. I told Ida she must be the one to slay Babbitt, to force him to look into her eyes in the moment of his death, to regret his actions, to understand that the consequences were finally catching up with him. And once he was dead, I promised Ida I would find a way to make her human again. She never had the heart to kill him, I said. Too gentle a soul, abused until she had no will of her own. Too meek to stain her teeth with blood. Her blood is on your hands. Hephaestus, Leah said, again changing the subject. What about your owl? Ida was begging you to kill the deputy. The white man. The white man in the white truck with the white hat and the white boots. Why didn't you do it, once you saw that she had failed to take him down? He was here, the day she was shot. You didn't tell me. But I could smell his scent all over the ground when I arrived home. Nobody would have seen you cut his throat. Nobody would have known. The gods would have devoured the body and protected you from the consequences, that you asked. Why didn't you avenge me, avenge Ida, avenge all his past and future victims? Why didn't you listen to her cries? You overlooked her human desires and ignored what she was saying with her human voice. You treated her like some spoiled household dog who only wants a bed and a belly rub. Don't lay the burden of shame on me, I said. You misled me. You told me she was an ordinary wolf, and to leave her alone. How could I have known Ida would fail? Clearly, I'm not as clever or powerful as you think me to be. Leah scowled. A child is dead, she said, and all you care about is shifting the blame to anyone but yourself. You sound an awful lot like Babbitt right now. You're wrong, I fumed. I have been humbled, Leah, and I believe you are the merciless one. You used magic stolen from a vulnerable mother, and left a little girl in a body she didn't want. You forced a child to fight your battle, and now Cassandra will be forever stalking you. She has her canine stare fixed on you, on your every move. One day, she'll pounce, and take her revenge on you. And she will tear you apart piece by piece, year after year, and replace your body with a wolf's. And I will never be powerful enough to protect you. I can't. The blanket around her shoulders fell. She quickly pulled it back up, but not before I saw a flash of the grey-brown of a wolf's furry foreleg, hastily stitched onto the bleeding stump of her elbow with greasy sinew. I looked up from the fresh wound. I met her eyes. She glared back at me, eyes fiery. But I could not hold her gaze. I bent my head, and I hid my face in my hands. This story is actually real, though, in the end, everything turned out to have a fairly logical explanation. I will get to that. It was about 2 years ago, I was about 21 at the time. That summer, a few friends and I would often go camping in the forests near our hometown. I have this old 1968 Chevy G10 van which has been super reliable over the years, and we had started a kind of tradition of taking it along straight into the woods with us on our trips. It was really nice to have transportation close by, and we didn't have to carry our tents and camping supplies very far. Besides, my Great Dane got scared easily, and walking him through a dark forest was more trouble than it was worth. We would roast hot dogs, tell stories, and generally just goof around. This particular night was the same as most weekends, the girls, Virginia and Diana, roasting some hot dogs. I was getting the tent set up. I bought this stupid folding tent for my dog, and he was no help in putting it together. my best friend, Fred, was standing around talking and watching the food cook. Well, soon the hot dogs finished and man was I hungry. Right as we were about to eat, though, we heard this piercing howl. When it comes to supernatural stuff, let's just say over the years my friends and I have had more than our fair share. We often would stumble into these situations where things would just get really weird. So given our history on these trips, we all got a bit freaked out by this howl. Especially when we looked into the undergrowth nearby and saw a pair of eyes staring back. Diana suggested it was a wolf, but we checked it out anyway, against my wishes. Sure enough, we found the tracks of a wolf or large dog. The only problem? It was obvious that these tracks were made on two legs. Fred was the kind of guy who wanted to prove the supernatural with more zeal than I can believe, so he obviously suggested it was a werewolf. I didn't want to get into this situation, but the next thing I know we are trudging through the woods looking for clues to where the dog or whatever had gone. I still remember so well as the woods gave way to a foggy clearing, and through the mist, I could make out a black iron fence with those spear point tips that you might see around a garden. In this case, it was around a cemetery. No problem. Hanging around Fred, I have been in my share of cemeteries and am not afraid of them outright. Still, I have to admit it was pretty creepy. The gnarled branches of the dead trees stuck out of the fog like skeletal hands grasping from the mists of the river Styx. Okay, maybe I was a little freaked out at this point, but it was about to get a lot worse. Next thing I know, I was staring down into an open grave and Fred was reading the headstone aloud. Here lies Silas Osterholt, half man, half wolf. Well, let's just say I was already half gone to get back to my van when Fred grabbed my shoulders. This is our first real clue. We can't leave now. I let him know that I wasn't about to follow the tracks leading away from the tombstone, which matched the ones near our campsite, because if there was a werewolf zombie out there that had crawled out of this grave, I didn't want any part of it. I am not even sure they heard my protests, and as always we were off to solve this paranormal mystery. Fred had a way about him that just made you want to follow him. And against every instinct, I pumped my legs in their direction as they continued to trek after this beast. We found more tracks in some mud further in the woods and followed them to an old, run-down flour mill. The second we got to the doorway, another of those freaking howls started. I could feel it piercing to my bones, but they all decided the best course of action was to go in anyway. We are all smart people, especially Diana, but there we were walking into this grumbling flour mill chasing what was at best a large dog and at worst a werewolf from beyond the grave. It was clear this werewolf didn't have made. This place was covered in spider webs, dust, and would be best described as just generally grey. Soon enough, we were splitting up to explore the place. The ladies went with Fred, I and my dog went off in the opposite direction. I figured since I didn't get to eat my hot dogs I could grab a snack while they searched the place. I figured if there were a wolf in here, we would hear it by now. Besides, this place actually seemed pretty cool. I found an old mask hanging on the wall. It looked African in origin. I decided to grab it and head back to find my pals. As I pulled it off the wall, I heard a thump behind me, but when I turned around there was nothing there. This obviously freaked me out, so I put the mask back and started jogging back in the direction of my friends. Well, this part of the story I got from Virginia later. Apparently, Fred had discovered more wolf tracks in the dust leading straight into a wall. After doing a bit of searching, they found a switch that revealed a secret door, leading to a small room with a single table, a chair, and a map. The map was crude, showing the general layout of the forest. There were 3 X's drawn on the map, and one was labeled Mill. Just after finding it, Fred and the ladies came face to face with our wolf. It had less hair than you might expect, and its flesh was a rotten green color. It stood, as Fred had suggested, on 2 legs. They knocked down a stack of crates on the beast and booked it out of there. As I was coming back to tell them about the sweet musk and strange sounds, they ran straight into me and my pup. Hitting the floor, I saw the thing's shadow approaching our corner. Things got real very fast. Next thing I know, my legs are going like rockets and my dog is right beside me. The others must have run a different direction, but the beast decided I was the more appetizing one and gave chase. I grabbed my dog and hid under a crate over a spot of particularly rotten floor. I kicked it through just as the monster found us, and my dog and I tumbled down to the next level of the building. I was so frantic I had no idea what to do, and my dog was being cowardly as ever. Who could blame him? We ran up a set of nearby stairs, and my eyes fell to rest on a large water hose, the kind built into the walls of industrial mills like this one in case of fires. I turned that hose on the beast as it topped the stairs, knocking it straight back down them. I jumped onto a nearby ladder, dog over my shoulders, and climbed for my life. The thing was back up the stairs and I could see its red eyes glowing with what was certainly a sentient hatred. This thing wanted to kill me, and I wasn't going to wait around. As I reached the roof of the mill, I saw the thing start to climb the ladder. I did the only smart thing and hopped down to a lower section of the building that was directly over the water wheel. The wheel was not too big, and I could tell that if I could cross it I could get to a nearby window and hopefully ditch this creature which by now had reached the upper roof. The dog and I ran across the water wheel, which felt a lot like running on an unstable treadmill, and I grabbed him and jumped headfirst through that window. We ended up in some kind of storage room filled with bags of wool. I covered us in a pile of the stuff and hoped the thing didn't find me. Next thing I know, my friends walk in and mistake us for monsters as we start crawling out of the wool to greet them. Before I can get it out of my mouth to stop them, they took off running, again, and so I ran after to find them. They were hiding in freaking barrels that had these weird rubber tubes sticking out of the top like snorkels. I knew they were there because the tubing was shaking around with their movements. They are lucky it was me looking and not the wolf thing. Diana noted all the things that were suspicious here: secret room, the map, the wool, the barrels with rubber tubing, and obviously the werewolf/zombie/ghost thing. Fred said he was determined to get to the bottom of it and set off for the exit. We headed out some shipping doors in the back and found a set of railway tracks that lead from a nearby storage building to a dock on the river, with an empty cart rolling by us down to the water. This was most likely originally to haul out flour produced by the mill, but this mill had been out of service quite a while by the look of it. I went to check out where the tracks went, while my friends went to see where the tracks originated. I followed the cart and came upon an old, rusty shipping barge. Some king of the very large storage container on the barge opened to accept the cart. As I got close, I heard a sound behind me and through the fog saw as the monster threw a large barrel straight at my head. It missed by a couple feet and landed just behind me, so I jumped as it rolled under me. I landed on the barrel and ran on it for about 2 seconds as it rolled. Probably the most skillful balancing act I have ever pulled off. I grabbed a hook from a ship-to-shore loading crane and swung like freaking Tarzan, scooping my dog up. I must have looked like Indiana Jones or something, but I honestly don't normally have that kind of skill. Funny what you can do when adrenaline is pumping. That heroism ended fast as I slammed into a small shack on the shore. Running inside, I found the basement area down a ladder, so down I went, heavy dog on my back. I followed a tunnel I found and hoped it would lead to my friends. As all this was going on, they had been following the tracks in the other direction. I heard them talking above me as they searched, and I knew my tunnel was directly under them. I walked below their feet until I found a ladder, and popped up on them. I told them about what I found, the electric barge that opened to catch the carts. For whatever reason, they didn't believe me. I took them back through the tunnel and showed them in person. A cart approached, and a section of the barge opened just as before. The cart went in, and so did we. Inside was a room full of those strange barrels with the rubber tubing. Soon enough, we also saw the monster. He was outside this section of the ship, fishing one of those strange barrels out of the river. He carried it inside and placed it on the newly arrived cart. I was sure I could hear a sheep from inside the barrel. Fred decided that he wanted to capture the beast, and in order to catch him, we would need to get inside the next barrel as it came down the river. They were planning to use the crane hook, the one from my heroic escape earlier, which they also didn't believe, to catch the beast when I popped out of the barrel, but obviously, such a stupid plan didn't work out. Instead, I just pushed my barrel back into the river after the crane inevitably missed the mark, and hoped the thing didn't eat me. It started giving chase in a small raft that was on the barge. At this point, it was clear that this thing was as smart as a human. It was also clear that this river gave way to a waterfall very soon. My loyal but terrified pup jumped into the water and pulled me out just before the falls. The werewolf wasn't so lucky. His raft snagged on a rock just as he went over the falls, and he began yelling, in English, for help. We pulled him up from the bank and found that he was just a man in a mask. In fact, he wasn't a werewolf, he was a thief and smuggler. He was using the old mill to move stolen livestock and used the costume to frighten off anyone who came along out here. They would float the stolen livestock and stolen goods from further up the river, and he would catch the barrels and ship them out to the black stock market or wherever you sell stolen livestock. Sure, it didn't turn out to be paranormal. I have to say, though, this was one of the more frightening camping trips I have taken. Background: last week at my friend's farm, northern Illinois. It's a large plot with a forest to the north. Our bonfire was near his barn, about 100 feet from the woods, with crops to the west and south. 12 of us at the bonfire. We're all around 15 years old, and 5 of us, myself included, own a FOID card, required to possess or purchase firearms. Story: the bonfire is going as planned, and at around 10 p.m. we light it up. All of us are chatting and having fun when one of my friends stops everyone. That friend was sitting near the crops. Listen. Everyone shuts up and we hear a really strange noise coming from the field. It's nearly impossible to describe perfectly, but it was a really deep hissing noise. Like if a large dog could hiss, it'd sound like that creature. My friend, who we'll call T, shines a flashlight toward there. From that distance, the light was hazy, but we saw a figure about 30 feet away from the fire. It was on all fours, about 5 feet long. It had large, powerful-looking hind legs coupled with feet that had claws, small but they looked lethal. But its front legs were long and stringy, with much more menacing claws. It was covered with fur, and its head was dog-like with large canines visible. The creature's eyes were deep blue and reflected the light. The party right now is struggling to comprehend what's happening. Most of us are just staring at the creature, which in turn is staring back at us. This continued for at least a minute until T comes to his senses. I'm gonna sneak back to the house and grab my guns, yell if the thing does anything weird. T leaves and the creature watches, its eyes following T as he enters the house. At this point, we have 3 flashlights on it and it's perfectly visible to us. 2 minutes later the door opens and T comes out with 2 .22s and a 9mm. The creature sees T and gets on its hind legs. I'm assuming it's a biped that was sitting down at the field, running toward the woods with a huge gait. Now the thing looks at least 6 feet tall. T hands me the 9mm and hands my other friend, the second .22. The creature's 20 feet out from the forest and T shoots at it missing. Stays at the fire while I and T go after it, only now I realize how stupid we are. The thing's at the foot of the forest, and it climbs up a tree. We both stop and fire a few more shots into the trees. We walk back and everyone decided to call their parents and finish it up early. Our excuse was a small downpour had started and we had to finish early. No one's talking about it, and we're not planning on telling our parents. T's parents led 2 more hunting trips, with bows and arrows due to the strict gun laws, but we didn't find anything. The tracks it left were washed away during a harsh storm. So 2 questions. What the hell did we see and has anyone else seen it? Also, I typed this on a phone so excuse some grammar issues that may arise. I'll edit it when I get access to a computer. I live in a small village in rural England. It's a sleepy little place, but for all that it has quite a rich history. There's an old castle some ways away that was owned by a feudal lord in the Middle Ages, and legends about the castle and the surrounding countryside about. My favorite legend is the one about the lord and his illicit lady lovers. It's a great story of guilt, revenge, and adventure, and I don't believe a word of it. My friend Sam, on the other hand, his favorite story is the one about the wolf. Legend has it that over 300 years ago the Lord's eldest son was out hunting when he was set upon by a monstrous hound. It knocked the boy from his horse, crippling him on impact, and then fled into the woods. The Lord's men who had been accompanying the boy had chased after it, with just one man staying behind to guard the lad. When the Lord's men returned to the spot where the accident took place, having failed to locate the wolf, there was no one there. Neither lad nor soldier, just a trail of blood and signs of a struggle. The young man was never seen again after that point, but ever since, there have been rumors and whispers of a midnight black wolf that haunts the full moons of our quaint little countryside. It's just a story, but Sam, he believes it. He loves the story, and he loves the imagery of the wolf. One Halloween Sam decided to dress up as the wolf from the legend. He was really excited because this Halloween was actually going to occur on a full moon as well. Now I know what you're thinking. Clearly, this story will end up with me mistaking the real werewolf for Sam in his costume at some point. How cliché. Let me assure you that that did not happen. It couldn't have. Sam's costume was good. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't good enough to mistake for the werewolf from the story. It wasn't bulky enough, and the mask, which was really just a motorcycle helmet with lots of cardboard and fake fur all over it, wasn't expressive or lively enough for that. The rest of his costume was alright, I guess. He had gotten a lot of dark clothing and covered every part of it in fake fur. Honestly, he really had gone to a lot of effort with the whole thing. What really impressed me was the attention to detail he had used. The cardboard teeth had little droplets of blood painted onto them. He had a tail made from a wire brush that he'd made look pretty authentic, and he walked around in a hunched manner, like he was some bizarre, lupine homunculus, struggling with the beast that lay within him. It was obvious that it was a costume, but you had to hand it to him. The costume did look like a werewolf ought to look. It sort of put me off my lunch, to be honest. I mean, it really is quite weird when you eat someone who looks so much like yourself.